Welcome to Board Game Binge, the place where we bring you bite-sized, bingeable board game content from across the industry. I'm your host, James Staley, and in this episode, we're chatting with Kate Otte, the game designer, graphic designer, and artist behind First Ascent. First Ascent is a board game based on her love of rock climbing and is currently on Kickstarter. Kate, welcome to the binge. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it is great having you. Just some really quick housekeeping for those of our podcast listeners, either you're watching live or if you are catching this tomorrow on the audio replay. This July, we have a couple gaps we're going to have in our schedule. So coming this Thursday is Canada Day here in Canada, so we're going to take this Thursday off. The following Monday, because of the July 4th long weekend, we're going to take the Monday off as well. So our next podcast we're going to have is the following Thursday, and we will be interviewing Jamie Stegmaier, which is going to be exciting. We're going to talk about Red Rising, which is an awesome game. It's got a lot of traction behind it. It should be a fun interview. My apologies for this past Thursday. I actually did not have a podcast because I was doing a little rock climbing myself. I had a kidney stone, which I would say is the exact opposite of exhilarating. But I'm back in good shape and here to talk to Kate about her rock climbing adventures and hear a little bit more about it. So, Kate, how long have you been rock climbing for? Is this something you've been doing your whole life, or?
Well, I did a little bit as a kid. I went to a camp. It was called Adventure Camp, and you did rock climb as part of that camp, and learned like rope skills, tying in, and things like that. So, and we did a lot of like high ropes courses, but I didn't really get into it until after I graduated from college, moved to Philly, kind of looking for a different thing to do, which Philly is like the weirdest place to get into rock climbing. We're not that close to huge meccas, but there was an awesome community here, and it just really worked out. Like I just kind of so happened to fall into a group of people that went climbing outside all the time. I found mentors to teach me how to climb outside, which was really my goal. There's some people that go to the gym and it's really more of like a fitness thing, which is great. Like that's a huge reason why I do it too. But the goal was always to go outside. And so, I met other people that rock climbed, and then, I've been doing it for about 7 years.
Wow.
So
now, when you first went outside, is it kind of like when you ski, you start off with little baby hills and you work your way up, or did you?
Definitely. You definitely take on, you start with easy stuff, and then you're also take on more responsibility the more you know. When you first go, you're kind of relying on other people to do everything for you. They're setting up the rope for you. They're figuring out what is climbable, what is actually a rock climbing route. There's some areas where it's pretty obvious. There's other areas where it's like a complete blank face of rock. So over time, you develop the skills of like knowing how to interpret a picture or a description, and then like looking up at the face and being like, oh yeah, this matches up, that I can see where it goes. You learn how to be in charge of your own safety, and kind of assessing risk. So yeah, it's been a process of just taking on more and more, and taking on more ambitious goals as well. Yeah.
Now, what's the biggest rock that you've climbed? Like, you've climbed a mountain, or?
Yeah, the biggest feature I've climbed is the Chief in Squamish.
Wow.
That took us it took us all day. We started at like 4 a.m. We did finish before it got dark out. We finished in the afternoon, but that was definitely the most ambitious thing that we've climbed. It's 14 pitches. A pitch is about a rope length. So basically you climb, you don't usually climb till you're like out of rope. You climb to a natural place that's like good to rest, like a ledge.
Yeah.
And then you bring the other person up, and then you kind of keep doing that. So we did that 14 times.
Wow. Now, is this stuff like pre-drilled into the wall, like from previous, or are you actually putting the pins in yourself in some cases?
Yeah, so we use, so that specific route is not bolted. So you do put in your own protection, but I should have grabbed some stuff.
That's all right.
It's removable. The first person like will basically slot like a nut or a camming device into the rock. So the camming device expands.
Yeah.
And so that way it doesn't damage the rock. It's just using natural constrictions. And then the second person that comes up actually removes it so that there's nothing left behind.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And do you have to get like permits and things like that? Like I just started thinking like with nature, like you gotta get permits to even fly a drone nowadays. So
Yeah.
or you just pick a rock and start climbing.
Yeah, it's not regulated. There are some climbing areas like actually Yosemite just introduced a permitting system. There are some backcountry areas that you need you need a permit, and actually like there's some other areas where the rangers, before they let you go in, they'll actually look at your equipment and make sure you have, they don't know if you have the skills, but they can at least tell, like, did you come prepared with the right gear? But
Yeah.
those are special circumstances. Like most areas, there is no regulation over like, does this person have any business being on this route or not?
And what's your aspirations for climbing? Like, do you have an end goal of kind of like a certain rock you want to climb, or?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's so many places I would like to climb. In general, I'm attracted to really big routes. I like doing these like all day endeavors, but I like things that you can do in a day, even if it takes 24 hours. I mean, I wouldn't mind doing a like two night trip, but as far as like big walls where you're sleeping on the wall for multiple days, I don't know that I'm necessarily attracted to that. I think, I am very involved in the Philadelphia climbing community. I actually run a mentoring program with our climbing group,
Oh, wow.
I think to kind of facilitate that growing even more, it would be, I think my climbing ambitions are getting more certifications and becoming a guide, or just doing more training so that I can facilitate that program like more efficiently. So, yeah.
That's cool. And how did this kind of match up with game? Like, have you been gaming your whole life, or is it something that just kind of in between while you're waiting, you pulled out some games, or?
Yeah. So I grew up playing cards more than games.
Yeah.
I don't feel like I was really exposed to modern board games, but I loved playing cards growing up. So I really like strategy. I like figuring things out. I love crossword puzzles. So when I was introduced to modern board games as an adult, it was like, oh my gosh, like this is awesome. Like, I just kind of fell in love with it immediately. And then I started working on First Ascent because I was playing a lot of games with other climbers. And it was just like, man, it would be really cool if we had a climbing game to play. And I always am looking for little side projects. I do design work as my day job, but I like having something that's my own to work on the side. So this obviously was like a lot bigger of a side project than I normally take on, but yeah, I was just like, yeah, this seems fun. I went into it not really knowing like what it was going to turn into, but yeah, so that's how I got started in it. And a few months, I mean, I just feel so fortunate that PAX Unplugged is in Philly. It's like a 15-minute bike ride from my house. So, a couple months after I started working on it, I went to that. I attended a ton of seminars, and then I kind of had my path for, okay, this is how you make a board game.
Oh, wow. So you did your research, which is good. Now, is this something you started like how, like I was looking at the game, which is, there's a lot of elements going on, right? So, but it's not an overcomplicated game. So I don't want people to misunderstand and think, oh, if there's too much going on now, like you can get the concept of how to play a game. I think you can probably describe how to play this game in five to 10 minutes easily, right? From what I've seen. But there is a lot of going on. There's a lot of really complex components to it. When did this start? Like the actual game itself, like the kind of the first ideation to then when you kind of had your first prototype that you could play with your, test play groups and so forth.
Yeah, so I started about 3 years
Wow.
ago, and my initial concept was kind of like adapting Ticket to Ride, but
Yeah.
for a mountain.
Yeah.
But it was like, well, there are a lot more things that I need to change to make it relevant for rock climbing.
Yeah.
So many things just evolved from that kind of beginning idea of you're building a route, but obviously you need resources, like you need skills and gear in order to climb. So I feel like from my gut feeling of what the game should be has not changed from the beginning. Like the goal of the game has pretty much stayed the same, but over time it's become a lot more nuanced, like way more interesting. um yeah, the way that, and even how you plan your route and what kinds of decisions you're making has evolved as well. But at the core of it just being about getting what you need and planning your way up the mountain has been the same from the beginning.
That's cool. You can tell there's been a lot of planning, right? And so it's not like people when they usually launch the first game, we'll usually start off with something simpler, right? Where this one has a lot of meat on the bone, which tells me, A, you've probably played a lot of different types of games that inspired you. And Ticket to Ride is actually something I wrote down. Just the card drafting mechanic you have where you kind of put 5 out and you pick kind of the 3 you want. And then you either pull from the pile or you can pull from the ones laid down. Then you can kind of redraft them out. But that's kind of where the Ticket to Ride similarities stop, right? And then you go like a completely different direction.
Yeah.
I'm going to share for people who are actually watching live the Kickstarter page. This is something that I think has been pretty awesome. You've hit, I think about 715 backers. Maybe you've added another one since, up to 716 now. Over $50,000, which is just incredible. I'm putting this in Canadian dollars. I know you're in the States, but this is in Canadian dollars. Sounds bigger. On a $21,000 goal, so you've more than doubled your goal. You're crushing it. You're still got 16 days to go, which tells me you're probably going to land at least at 70,000. Could be anywhere between 70 and 100,000, depending on how your kind of hockey stick goes on the back end. But you're definitely headed towards some pretty good numbers. Can you walk us through? Now, I know you can't see it, but the people at home can see it. Just the essence or the basic mechanics of how this game works. Like, how do you play this game?
Yeah, so everyone is playing as a climber who has a unique ability, and you're trying to gain the most points as you climb the mountain before you run out of rope. So you have a set number of rope. You can see the board is made up of these individual hex tiles. Those are pitches. That's what I was talking about before, where you have a rope length you can climb before you have to stop.
And those are randomly placed each time, right? When you play the game, you shuffle them up and you...
Correct. Okay. Yeah, the board is pre-balanced, so like it does get harder as you go up, but there's multiple, so you're not exactly sure. And actually the top half of the mountain is flipped over when you start. You can't see what's up there. But you generally know that it's going to be more difficult. And so each tile you might be able to tell from the small symbols, that each tile has a different set of resources that you'll need in order to climb it. And those resources there's 3 different types of climbing skills. There's gear, and then there's also water and psych. So the gear and the skills are cards that you draw throughout the game. The water and psych depletes from your character as you play.
What happens when you run out? Do you just stop being able to move?
You have to rest. You lay your meeple down, and then which is actually kind of fun because then you might block somebody. They might want you to move off of it, but yeah. And then when you rest, you can go back to full, or you can build yourself back up a little bit.
Psych back up to keep climbing.
Exactly. So you're essentially gaining resources throughout the game. You're drawing those cards. You're moving onto the tile, advancing up the mountain. Each tile is also worth a certain number of points. And every time you advance onto a new tile, you draw a climbing card, which is an event. All of those cards have a situation and a choice. It gives you two options for how to resolve the situation. And most of those decisions are resource management. They might be affecting other players. You might be modifying the board. You might be rolling the dice for like, you know, if it's one outcome, you'll get a lot of stuff. If it's another outcome, you're going to lose some stuff.
So let's talk a little bit about that, because when I was looking at that, I thought that was a very interesting little mechanic where at one point, if you don't have all the resources you need, if you don't have all that, like the skills and like, you know, if you're missing one thing that card needs, you can still take a shot at trying to go up to ascend, I guess. And you have to take a risk. So you got a risk die, I guess, right? That you roll. Mm-hmm. And either your risk pays out or some bad stuff can happen. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So that mechanic solved a bunch of different issues. Like one, it solved this issue. You know, one of the pieces of feedback I got in play testing was like, you're essentially not playing the game when you rest. Like the game is about moving forward. That's what you're doing on your turn. Can you find a way where you minimize resting? Like, can we just get, you know, it's necessary because it stops the some of the front runners. But also I don't want to do it all the time. I don't want to be doing it 5 times a game. Mm-hmm. So if you're only missing one resource, you can roll the dice. So it gives people a choice of whether they want to rest or not and push their luck. For people that like, you know, this is a strategy game, but for people that like that feeling of risk and like games with a little bit more tension, that risk die provides that. It also, because when you lose resources, you give them to another player. You don't just put them in the discard pile. So it also provides this really fun player interaction element where it's a conversation of like, well, you should give me the resources because of XYZ, or I gave you stuff last round, so I should get those cards from you, or don't give it to them, they're winning.
So you can actually give people cards, you can actually give resources to people.
Exactly. Yeah. If you risk it, but you roll one of the, well, actually 2 sides of the dice will mean that you're giving things to other players. So, which also becomes interesting when it's a really competitive game. Then it's like, well, do I risk it to go faster? You know, I can move more quickly, but if I lose, then I'm going to be helping my competition. So yeah, it just ends up being this fun mechanic that is completely optional. You know, people that only like straight strategy, no chance, do not have to use it, but it does usually pay off. So yeah.
That's cool. Can you, like, the sense I'm getting is there's not too much take that in this, or if any, but can you purposely can you literally block somebody and keep them from moving a turn? Because I notice you can't go on somewhere you've already climbed, and you can't occupy a spot that someone else is currently on. So is there a situation where you can literally kind of climb in a direction that blocks somebody off and they have to kind of wait until you kind of pass? Or
yeah, that's where most of the blocking happens. And I alluded to this earlier. Yeah. Like if you're waiting for someone to move off of the tile that you want to get onto and then they rest, then it does become like, okay, well, now I'm giving up 2 turns to get onto this tile. I should probably just move somewhere else.
Yeah. But you can move somewhere else. I guess there's always
yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's also, it becomes more interesting because the player order changes every round. And so you really have to think about what order you're going to be playing in, or who's going before you, to anticipate like, okay, I think they're going to move off of that before it's my turn, or no, they're going to go after me. So I have to figure out something else to do. But it is all soft blocking. You know, they'll eventually move off of it, but you'll get less points.
So you're not cutting anybody's rope, for example.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So it just didn't seem to be in the spirit of climbing. There's very little interaction. It is basically just that someone else is on your route. And it is much more about like helping people, but you might be inconvenienced. So a lot of those situations are, embedded into those climbing cards, those event cards. And that's anytime that there was this like moral choice, there are these summit beta tokens. Beta is like advice that you know, if I've never climbed it before, but you would have, I would say, do you have any beta? And then you would be like, oh yeah, the hardest part is up towards the top. It's this kind of feature, but you can get in gear, you know, that's what you would say. Or like, just stay to the left, go as far left as you can. That's what beta is. So there's these tokens that kind of, if you do the right thing, you can get one, and it's always a good thing. Or if you're going to be selfish, then you'll get something else and lose something else.
Your decision to do the head wall reveal, thematically, I like it, because it's kind of thing where, well, you wouldn't really see kind of your path until you kind of get up to that upper ledge. But was part of that to prevent people from planning too far ahead, or what was kind of the thought process behind
that? So that exactly. It did used to be like one big mountain, you could see the whole thing. And there were a couple issues with that, exactly what you said. People tried to plan too far in advance, and then they weren't really engaged. The other issue was when the entire mountain is connected, you would get into these traffic jams where like you kind of started on the wrong side of the board, or like everybody started on one side of the board and there was like no way to get out of it. Mm-hmm. And so by splitting the mountain in half and introducing this ledge, which once you get up to that middle feature, you can, if you think of it as a literal ledge, you could just go up there and then walk over to another side of the mountain. And that's exactly what we do when we climb. So that added some mobility as well, just to reduce those traffic jams. And then also it plays more, I think it makes the objectives a lot more interesting. Mm-hmm. Because all of those objectives are trying to climb a certain combination of pitch types. And not seeing those from the outset means that you're making decisions in the beginning, or kind of like taking a chance of, well, I hope there's a lot more of those up at the top, but you don't know. So you'll have to change up your strategy potentially.
Certainly it's a lot less intimidating, I would say, right? Like when you have a board that has like all these pieces and you can see each one of them has, 5 different things you have to do to unlock it. I mean, it can be overwhelming, right? To come in, and especially if it's the first time playing a game and you see all this stuff kind of in front of you. So it's almost like climbing. You're biting off little pieces as you go, right? You're not having to kind of consume it all in one shot.
Yeah, exactly.
I really love these, the way you track where you've gone. And I'm sharing the screen for people watching, where you've got these ropes that you place down on the tiles that you've left, your hexes that you've left. So when you see after several rounds somebody's playing, you can actually see the ropes going up the mountain, the way they've tracked, and other people going over top of their ropes and going maybe a different angle and stuff like that. I thought that was pretty clever. Was that something that you always knew you were going to have in there, or is that something that you kind of more of necessity of a way of tracking that you just said, okay, well, why don't we make it ropes?
Yeah, so I feel like what you're using to track while you climb has changed almost more than anything else in the game. I've just gone through so many iterations, like things that stacked, things that you flipped over. I don't know why it took me so long to get to rope, which we are hoping to actually make out of cord, which I think will be a lot cooler than little cardboard pieces.
That'd be cool.
But people kept on asking for rope. Like they just kept on introducing it, and they wanted it somewhere. And the pieces that I originally wanted, things that stack, and the manufacturer could not figure out how to do that. So we went to rope, which I think was just great. But one of the reasons for that is that I really do not like games where you can tell the entire time who's winning. And one of the things that you're focusing on is not what am I going to do next necessarily, but more of this feeling of anxiety of how many points am I behind. Mm-hmm. And so I was from the beginning, very much against having something that you're tracking your score as you play. And I also always forget to do it with certain games, like unless there is a round, a round where everybody is doing their points, like I just never remember to do it. So
Yeah.
I wanted it to be like possible to figure out who was in the lead, but it was going to take a little bit of effort. You have to want to do that. And I think it also makes it a better playing experience for people that it's their first time, or maybe this is a little bit heavier of a game than they would normally play. They can kind of be content playing this game with zero strategy and zero care of who's winning and still have a great time, and still very much play the game. So
Ticket Ride kind of reminds me a bit of that, like the scoring mechanism where you can technically, track your score as you go, but we never do because we always lose track. And then it's like, okay, how many points? Did I count all my points? Did I not count all my points? So usually at the end, we'll just take turns and say, okay, let's count the blue. Now let's count the yellow. Let's count the black. Usually have a general idea of who might be in the lead based on the amount of track they've laid, but you really don't know till the very end, which is kind of cool. So now that you've created this game, and I would say that you've got kind of the perfect triad, right? So you're a graphic designer, you're an artist, you've got some business background as well, so that you've kind of got the sweet spot for creating a board game, right? Because most people who are doing games have to go and outsource that themselves, outsource one of those pieces. So congrats on that. That's awesome. And I just have to say,
yeah.
I saw you've got 265 printed pieces that I counted. I don't know how much of that's unique artwork, but I think probably most of it. So just the sheer amount of artwork in this game, if you're going to hire somebody to do that, it would be very costly, right?
Not happening. It would, yeah,
so
it would just
not
happen.
Probably the number of pieces in here have a little bit to do with who's actually doing the actual design. So congrats on that. What is the next kind of evolution for you on this? So you've got this game, you've matched up, your passion, which is, climbing. You've done your one game. Now, is there going to be more games coming, or are you going to look at other themes, or kind of where's your head at, or is it kind of like just a one-shot deal, this game?
Yeah, I don't want to, yeah, I really like this industry. Like I feel like the people that I've met, it's just such a cool community. Like I don't see myself like, okay, did my thing, now bye. But I don't have any games in the works. Like I said, I'm always kind of doing side projects, so I am kind of looking ahead to what the next project is, but I'm not sure it'll be a board game. But I would like to stay engaged and maybe take on a smaller project as the next board game. Maybe it'll be a little simpler, or just helping out someone else with their campaign. But we'll see. Just trying to get through this one first.
What's the biggest piece of advice you'd have for someone that is doing a game for the first time that you kind of learned along the way here?
Well, I think it's really important to, I think there's two things. Is one, it's not really enough to just say, oh, I want to make a game that's fun. Like, you'd be very specific about the feelings that you want to create, or the feelings that you want to stay away from. And I felt like every time, you'll get so much feedback in play testing, and it can be hard to kind of like parse out what is right for the game.
Yeah.
And if you just keep going back to like, well, I think that mechanic is going to create this feeling that I said I didn't want to do, or that actually contributes to that's going to move me in the right direction. I think having that, it just helps make decisions so much easier. It just creates like a right answer for things that I think helped me a lot, especially when I wasn't sure what to do next.
Yeah.
And I think that the second thing I would say is that just remember, everything in your game is a message. So be very purposeful with what does the artwork look like? Who is on the artwork? What messages are you sending with that? You have all of these tools at your disposal to create a world. So just be very purposeful, especially if you're creating an alternate world, or something that's in the future. you're telling people what you think the future looks like and not including people in that future, or not including people in that future sends the wrong message. So just be very purposeful with each element of your game, and all of those things coming together are ultimately going to create a very rich and immersive experience. So yeah, that's what I would say.
That's great advice. I find when with game design specifically, when you're sourcing feedback from people, right, and play testing, feedback is great because it's free, right? There's no cost to get feedback. So I always encourage people to get as much feedback as you can. Say thank you, right? I appreciate it. To the person, I appreciate the feedback. Thank you. And make sure you're taking notes so that you can reflect on it later, but then reflect on it. Not all advice is going to be right for your game. Not all advice is great advice. I mean, often you will have people who are going to try to give you advice that turns into something that's not, right? Like, it's not advice. It's them trying to create a game that they want versus the game they're looking at, right? So it's a bit of a delicate balance. And I think the skill is doing that in a way that you're appreciative and opening up for people to give that feedback without getting too offended. Because sometimes the feedback can be pretty tough, right? And you might hear some things you don't want to hear. I've been there. Mm-hmm. I've had some better responses than others, but usually it's always thank you, right? Thank you for the feedback. The times when I get most frustrated, and again, I don't let it manifest until after, when I'm by myself, is when the feedback is like, well, you should do this. And it's like, okay, but that's not the game. That's that game over there. This is the game I'm trying to create, right? So that's a good thing about board games. There's so many different styles and mechanics and types of play that people want, right? So the last thing you want to do is get somebody, for instance, who hates card games to be a play tester on your card game, because they're not going to give it the open mind, and they're not going to ultimately be the audience that's going to buy that game anyways, right? So you're best suited to try to find the people to kind of fit the niche of what you're trying to create. So, and I think you've done that beautifully with this game. I love the fact that, you know, all the things I've read so far, is everybody echoes the same sentiment, which is that this game is true to the theme, right? If you've never rock climbed in your life, but you play this game, you're going to have an idea of what some of the terminology is, right? Some of the steps, some of the processes you go through. I was learning words and I was reading. I'm like, is it arete or arets is one of the cards. I'm like, yep. Okay, I was learning a new term, right? Off belay is another one. So, I think you've done a great job in thematically putting something out there that I think people are really going to enjoy. Clearly a lot of replayability in the feedback also you're getting online with the different reviewers and so forth. So I just can't wait to see this come out, and quite frankly, see where you guys land. This is going to be awesome. So I want to wish you all the best in this coming year, and I can't wait to see where the campaign goes.
Yeah, thank you. Very excited.
No worries. Off belay.
Yeah, off belay.
This has been an episode of the Board Game Binge podcast, hosted by James Staley, produced by James Staley and Mike Bruner, with original music by Nick Smith. If you would like to watch these interviews live, simply join the Facebook group Board Game Binge, and you'll get access to live interviews, giveaways, and interesting board game content from across the industry. I can't wait for you to join us. See you next time.